Well, good evening to one and all, to those who have joined us on this broadcast, ACDP Family Broadcast, on behalf of our President, the Reverend Dr. Kenneth Meshwe. Allow me to take this opportunity to greet you and welcome you to our broadcast for this evening. Our President, unfortunately, is not able to join us tonight, but will definitely be back with us next week. He had a trip that he undertook outside of the country and is just returning today sometime. So thank you to one and all for joining in. We hope that the previous broadcasts that we've done have been educational, that you have learned from those previous broadcasts, and that you will continue to invite others to join us on these important ACDP information sharing, and looking also at matters pertaining to our nation, pertaining to our economy, pertaining to Parliament, and just ordinary matters that affect ordinary people on the ground. So we want these also to be about you. We want this to be as interactive as possible. And so if you are joining in, we have Bonnie Bernardo, who has just come in and greeting us. Welcome, Bonnie, and thank you for joining in. We have Tlotliso Mputi. Thank you for also coming in. Katleho Fortunate, God bless you. Watching with his family in Limpopo. And so this is great. So we've certainly got Limpopo with us, hoping to see that if we can get some of the other provinces. KwaZulu-Natal, where are you? My home province. And then we're also looking at, great to see Northern Cape also coming in, Roddy. God bless you. And Mpumalanga, Suzette, God bless you. All right, so we have folk kind of streaming in. KZN, there we go. Jamil, bless you. Thank you for joining in. And so we want to also just encourage you there we have Gauteng also, DSG, and from Cape Town, our National SecGen. Good evening, good evening, good evening to all of you. And so we have hopefully a fairly packed and informative evening today with lots of information coming through from our Member of Parliament, Steve Swart. Unfortunately, our Maurice Sukers MP is unable to join us because of load shedding in her area. But yes, having said that with regards to load shedding, clearly I think right now the challenges that we find at Eskom are clearly beginning to take a toll. And it's taking a toll on the economy and just the psyche of ordinary South Africans out there. The ACDP, also via our Member of Parliament, Steve Swart, and our President, and previous Members of Parliament for the ACDP, during the state capture era, have proudly and done the ACDP proud in terms of representing the ACDP in exposing state capture. As a result of state capture, and Eskom is one of those entities involved in state capture, and we are now beginning to see the ramifications of state capture, where our economy is taking a hammering. Jobs are continually being shed. It is said that in 2022, some 650,000 jobs were lost as a result of load shedding. And we could see between 800 to 900,000, possibly even close to 1 million jobs being lost this year as a result of load shedding. The cost also to the fiscus is in the region of about 1 billion rand per day. And clearly, this is unacceptable and is placing a huge strain, not only on businesses, but also just on the ordinary family in South Africa. And this is one of the reasons why we within the ACDP have indicated that change needs to come. And we position ourselves as the ACDP as that party of choice and that party of change to bring about a government that is transparent, a government that is clean, a government that is corruption-free, a government that is godly, a government that aspires to serve the best interest of South African citizens. And so some of the things that we've been saying with regards to Eskom, and our president has made these statements in Parliament, is that we need to ensure that there is what we call fit for purpose. The Singaporean model speaks about meritocracy. It speaks about the fact that we need to have honesty in place and pragmatism. So the MPH principle, meritocracy, pragmatism, and honesty. This is what turns Singapore around to the successful economic model that it currently is. And so this is what we need to be seen happening at Eskom as well. Our president has said that South Africans do not care what color service delivery comes in, as long as they get quality service delivery. And so at Eskom, we are saying, bring in those engineers fit for purpose, who understand how Eskom works, who understand how to get the energy that is in so much demand out there, where demand is able to meet supply. We need to clean up as well the administration, because clearly the President Ramaphosa himself acknowledged maladministration seems to be rampant at Eskom as well. And so these are just some of the challenges and some of the initiatives that the ACDP would be looking at implementing. Where there is honesty, corruption has to go. And so you're implementing an ethical administration. Obviously, there has to be also a mixed bag in terms of energy supply, and a mixed bag of base load, which includes coal, which includes gas, which includes green energy. And so there has to be also a mixture of these different types of base loads that are able to ensure that we keep the lights on. So these have been some of the things that the ACDP has been speaking of in terms of keeping the lights on at Eskom. Now, we have waiting in the sidelines our Member of Parliament who has been leading the pack, so to speak, when it comes to the hate speech bill or hate crimes bill. And so the Member of Parliament representing the ACDP on the Justice Portfolio Committee, the Honourable Steve Swart, is with us tonight. And so we're going to ask for Steve to come in with his presentation and to inform you of what the status currently is with regards to the hate speech bill. Steve, good evening and welcome, and over to you.
Thank you, DP, and thank you very much for your opening comments about Eskom. It's a deep, deep concern. So greetings to you and greetings to all members of the ACDP, supporters, all those that are interested on this platform. We are raising very important issues, and I, in the time I've got, would like to discuss with you an issue which threatens our freedoms, threatens our freedom of expression, our freedom of religion, and that is the hate crimes and the hate speech bill. I'd like to focus on the hate speech aspect of this. I've got a short presentation with slides, so if you want to take notes, please do that, because the cutoff date to make submissions, and I would ask you to make submissions in your personal capacities, but not as the ACDP, because I will be making a formal representation on behalf of the ACDP. And so please, at the end, we will flight the address that you can make the representations to. You've got 1 week, less than a week, Monday, 1 o'clock. Monday, 1 o'clock, it closes. Write down that address, Hate Crimes Bill B 9B 2018 at parliament.gov.za. It's very important. But here's some information for you that I've been spreading quite broadly. And so I'm going to quickly go through this presentation. And should there be any questions after that, we can engage. But let's just say right from the forefront, the ACDP has been at the forefront of opposing and improving the hate crimes and hate speech bill. We've focused mainly on the hate speech side of things, but it is very important for us to say at the context, right at the beginning, that no one in whatever setting should be allowed to make statements that advocate hatred or incite violence. And yes, we've got a lot of racism in our country. And that's been dealt with by existing legislation. Hatred and that incites violence is already prohibited in terms of the Constitution, section 16(2), which sets out the limits of freedom of expression. And that includes any incitement of imminent violence or advocacy of hatred that is based on certain grounds, race, ethnicity, gender, or religion, and that constitutes incitement to cause harm. So that is prohibited already. Now, what the context of this is, if you look at freedom of expression, that is section 16, and it is at the heart of our democracy. You can imagine if we weren't able to freely express ourselves, as many communist countries, you may not have the freedom of expression. In this court case, freedom of expression lies at the heart of democracy in this constitutional court case. And the Constitution recognizes that individuals need to be able to hear, form, and express opinions and views on a wide range of matters. When you get to freedom of religion, the Constitutional Court has held that the right of freedom of religion, it's the right to entertain religious beliefs as a person chooses, the right to declare those beliefs openly without fear of hindrance or reprisal, and the right to manifestly believe by worship and practice or by teaching and dissemination. So that is very broad. But all rights, as we know, are limited. And so we see section 36 does allow certain rights to be limited. Now, the bill's definition of hate speech is much broader than was set out in the Quilani judgment, which I referred to earlier. And the sad thing is it criminalizes hate speech, which we believe should be protected under section 16(1), and which the state is obliged to protect. Now, to limit the rights under section 16(1), which is your right of freedom of speech, there are certain tests that you have to pass. Section 16 sets out, as I read earlier, the section 16(2). There you've got section 61. Everyone has got the right of freedom, but it's limited under and I'm sure you would all agree, propaganda for war, incitement of imminent violence, advocacy of hatred based on those grounds. That is not allowed. But here we're sitting with further limitations on our freedom of expression that go, in our view, way beyond what section 16(2) says. Now, what is important is the Quilani Constitutional Court judgment says that speech that goes beyond mere offensive expression and can be understood as extreme detestation and vilification, which risk provoking discriminatory activities against that group. That is what hate speech is actually. It's beyond mere offensive language. Thus, expressions which are merely hurtful, especially when understood in everyday parlance, are insufficient to constitute hate speech. Offensive speech is protected by freedom of expression. And this is our concern with this bill, because it criminalizes even what some people would say is offensive language, where you might say from the pulpit certain issues, say against abortion, people hearing that might take offense against same-sex marriage, people might take offense at that. Now, hate speech should not involve merely offensive language. It should be vilification added with imminent violence. Now, we know the Quilani judgment related, the existing law in our country relates to civil law under the PEPUDA, which is the Promotion of Equality Act. Already, we've seen this act has been used where you've got racial utterances, but it is a civil law. You've also got existing criminal law. Now, the hate speech bill is a new criminal law which sets out the criminalization of hate speech, which is a very high threshold and must be the very last resort. And there's up to 8 years imprisonment. So the present section 4A, which criminalizes hate speech, it talks about harmful or incites harm. And this concept is much broader than section 16(2). When one considers the crucial definition of harm, it is so broad. The central definition of this act is harm. It is substantial, emotional, psychological, physical, social. What is socio-economic detriment? That objectively or severely undermines the human dignity of the targeted individual groups. Now, the ACDP's been involved in this process in the Justice Committee, and we managed to lift the threshold by inserting the word, it must be substantial, it must be severely undermines, but we still are concerned about these terms of social, of economic. We understand physical, psychological, but emotional, these are such broad terms. And what is even more concerning, there is no definition of hatred in a hate speech bill. There's a number of grounds that are set out which are much broader than Section 16, in terms of Section 16.2 of the Constitution. And here we've got sexual orientation, gender identity expression, sex characteristics, etc., which are much broader than what is required. Now, why do we feel so strongly about this? Because we feel that the existing laws are sufficient and have been used sufficiently. The provisions of Popuda allow for civil remedies and matters can be referred for criminal investigation, and it has happened already under certain cases. The Momberg case, the Penny Sparrow case, they've already been dealt with well and sufficiently under existing laws. Why have we got this additional bill? Is it not just purely for political purposes? Now, the ACDP, with other groups, we asked for an exemption for artistic creativity, for academic, for reporting, and of course, for religious and clergymen, pastors. And that was built in. If you look under Section 2D, interpretation, proselytizing, or espousing of any religious conviction, tenet, belief, teaching, doctrine, or writings. That means if you are involved in that, you do not commit hate speech unless, look at the caveat, unless it does not advocate hatred that constitutes incitement to cause harm based on one of the more grounds. Now, it's a circular argument. It says you're not guilty of hate speech if you interpret or proselytize any religious conviction unless you commit hate speech. So it is a partial exemption that does not go far enough despite, and it's a circular argument which defeats the purpose. So what we've seen internationally is that hate speech provisions, laws have been used against Christians internationally. There are numerous cases where Christians, street preachers have been persecuted in the United Kingdom, elsewhere, for hate crimes where they've been preaching the gospel. Many have been later acquitted, but this illustrates the need for a very strong religious exemption clause and that it must be strengthened. Now, when we had the debate, the ACDP voted against this bill because of these concerns, and whilst there was very slight improvements, we still voted against it. In the debate in the House, it was very interesting that the ANC Member of Parliament, Honorable Maseko Jeli, said the following. She said, we are also making sure that the preachers must stay on the line. When you preach the gospel. Stop talking things that will be very insulting to people. What nonsense. This is deeply concerning. How dare a member of, a parliament say what you must preach? Yes, we preach the gospel, but we speak about a lot of other issues. And it's a matter of great concern that the ANC would say to pastors that they might not speak about justice issues, about load shedding, about the political issues in our country, about poverty, unemployment. It's absolutely unacceptable. And this indicates that there is an agenda to be used in this bill for political purposes. Now, remember, if you are guilty of these very broad definitions, and if you are guilty of hate speech, the imprisonment, the bill as tabled only spoke about 3 years, Deputy President, 3 years. Now it's gone up to 8 years. And that is absolutely unacceptable for us because it is a severe encroachment on freedom of expression and freedom of religion. So the ACDP voted against this bill on the 24th of March. It went past the National Assembly. It is now before the National Council of Provinces. They have asked for submissions, and you can make opposition voices heard until Monday, the 22nd of May, 1 o'clock. You can write, you can make use of anything of what I've said so far, but again, make it under your personal names, your churches. There are a lot of people that are flooding the National Council of Provinces. If the national, I've been engaging with the chairperson there, and it could be that they're going to amend the bill slightly, because in our view, it's unconstitutional as it is presently drafted. They might send it back to the National Assembly. But again, if we pass it, they pass it, then the president can either send it back to Parliament, we'll petition the president as well, or he can refer it to the Constitutional Court. Let's have our voices heard. We've been fighting this issue for a long time. We've seen slight improvement, but we cannot, Deputy President, allow our voices to be silenced under the guise of this hate speech bill, which some people have referred to as a censorship bill. Thank you so much, Deputy President. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate that comprehensive and insightful presentation that you've given to us. Just a comment perhaps on the international examples of where the hate speech bill was applied. There are two that comes to mind. One where in the United States, one of the mayors in one of the states asked for the pastors to send all of their sermons to the mayor, because the mayor wanted to see whether there was any non-compliance with the hate speech bill that had just been passed in that particular state. So that's one example that I can recall. The second was a member of parliament who read from the Bible, and this was with regards to the civil unions or the same-sex marriages. And she read from the Bible in terms of what God's word speaks of in relation to that, and thereafter found herself being hauled before court. This is one of the European countries, and facing a possible jail time as a result. So those are two of the examples that I can think of. What are those possible ramifications, and for us seeing such kind of restrictions being placed on South African ministers, preachers of the gospel, should this bill actually pass?
No, well, that's the key, is that those hate speech bills would not have had a religious exemption clause that we've built into our bill, but we're still saying it doesn't go far enough. And I think that when that is tested in the courts, and rest assured that the first pastor or person that is charged under this bill, they will take, should it be passed in its present form, they will take it all the way up to the Constitutional Court. But that's where the interpretation of our religious exemption clause will come into play, and to what degree it is in fact a religious exemption clause. And it could be that a court says, but Parliament intended a religious exemption clause, it's not strong enough. The Constitutional Court could read matters in, could make it stronger. But that's where we at this stage need to make it much stronger. We need to make the definitions much narrower. What do we mean by harm? And return to the wording in terms of section 16.2, which makes it very clear that it is harmful utterances plus incitement. And the intention there is incitement to physical harm. Here we've got social harm, emotional harm. What do those mean? They're not even defined themselves, and they are so broad for interpretation. So economic harm. So if you advocate for an economic boycott, for example, that could be seen as a form of hate speech. So at the moment, we're still deeply concerned. We're in the process still, as Parliament is still drafting. It's still a process to go. But let us express our opposition, because it does infringe on our rights of religious rights of religious freedom and our rights of freedom of expression. Yes, we've made it very clear. We've got to make sure that racist utterances that are incitements to harm must be dealt with, but we also say there's existing laws. This is unnecessary. So I hope that's helpful for us going forward. Yes. Thank you, DP.
All right. Steve, thank you so much. There we have our Member of Parliament, Steve Swart, who's been at the forefront championing and fighting for the rights of those within the church. And so The ACDP cares. It cares about you. The ACDP cares about your church. It cares about your family. We want to encourage you to give support. And so the date has been given to you. We want to encourage you to, so there we have it, the 22nd of May, Monday, the 22nd of May, before the cutoff time of 1 o'clock. We want to ask you to send in your objections via emails to the Hate Crimes Bill, which is parliament.gov.za. The address is there, to the Honorable S. Sheikh, before Monday, the 22nd of May. So do your bit for our nation and also for the church. And so we've seen also some comments saying that, you know, this is just an attack on the church. And so we appreciate those who've, there's Leonie Lowe. Thank you for leading this fight and to protect us from future religious persecution and legal advice that is looking at the future impact of today's laws. Leonie, thank you for your comments. We must understand that we are led by a Marxist communist government who are opposed in principle to the Bible. And so clearly, I think that we do have those who have a challenge. Remember that the Bible is no longer the supreme law and is not the supreme law of the land. The Constitution, this government sees the Constitution, the South African Constitution, as the supreme law of the land. Siyabonga Malinga saying, we appreciate and support your work, ACDP. So we want to just thank you. Thank you for those comments, and thank you for those who have been supporting us. And again, thank you to our Member of Parliament, Steve Swart. Edward says we are ready to voice out our voices against the hate speech bill. So yes, do your share, do your portion, and make your voice heard. All right, I want to touch on what is becoming fairly topical in the country today, and that is the Employment Equity Amendment Act. And so government has put out the Employment Equity Amendment Act for comment, and this act seeks to present quotas across some 18 different economic sectors. But in putting out those particular quotas, there would be some of the minority groups, minority population groups in particular in South Africa, that inadvertently would be excluded from employment opportunities. And so, again, I want to emphasize the point of the ACDP. The ACDP is not opposed to ensuring that we look at rectifying the wrongs of the past. But we also understand that we cannot continue to blame apartheid laws for where we currently are. And so some 30 years after our democratic freedom, we now currently have some of the highest unemployment rates in the world. Some 30 years after 1994. South Africa is one of the most, if not the most unequal nation in the world, with a Gini coefficient of some 0.73, making us the most, if not one of the most unequal nations in the world. We continue to see poverty increasing, where some 25% of South Africans go to bed without having a meal, going to bed hungry. And that number continues to increase. Now, that cannot continue. The South African government cannot continue to blame that on the wrongs of the past, cannot continue to blame that on apartheid. There have been other countries like Singapore, Malaysia, Japan, Germany, who came out of wars, came out of their colonial past. South Korea, one of them, which was colonized by Japan, came out of their colonial past. And in one generation, some 20 to 30 years after their horrendous past, was able to turn their country around. And so the challenge is very clearly that our president speaks about structural reform, and that structural reform is needed to move the country in the right direction. And what simply structural reform is looking at policies that are antagonistic to economic growth, looking at policies that are antagonistic or in opposition to growing the economy, in opposition to creating employment, in opposition to having a solid education platform. And then you look at those particular policies and you change the policies. So our president, Mr. Ramaphosa, speaks about structural reform, but then fails to implement the necessary reforms in order to turn our economy around. And I think very clearly the Employment Equity Amendment Bill, by ostracizing, in particular, certain race groups that are not considered to be African, and limiting those particular groups from some 18 economic sectors, from being economically active in some 18 economic sectors, is unconstitutional. The Constitution guarantees the right to equal employment opportunities, irrespective of your race, irrespective of your religion, irrespective of your culture. And so clearly, I think that the ACDP's position on this, again, our president, Dr. Kenneth Meshwe, has indicated that most South Africans want to see change, want to see service delivery, tired of having potholes litter our roads, fill our roads. Some of our roads are more filled with potholes than with tar. We want to see where there are challenges with sewage spilling into the streets and in our hospitals. We want those who are properly qualified to be able to come and sort those problems out. If we have the correct policies in place, then all South Africans, there's enough resources in South Africa to be able to meet the needs of every South African. In Singapore, it is said that they previously had high unemployment rates, but when they were able to turn the economy around, they had to begin to import employment. And so there were not enough members of the population. The economy grew to such an extent that there were not enough members within the Singaporean population to actually meet the job demands. And so this is what the ACDP wishes to see. And so we learn from the best practice of some of your countries, like within the Asian Tigers. And we do not put impediments to minority groups and further ostracizing them. What this Employment Equity Amendment Bill will do is it will begin to continue to create division amongst the different groups, which is exactly what the apartheid government actually did. It was rule and divide and rule. And so this appears then to be the strategy that the ruling party is now wanting to employ. It's a divide and rule strategy, dividing the different groups within South Africa so that the ruling party can continue with its failed policies, failed social engineering policies, and failed economic policies. So very clearly, I think when the ACDP becomes the government of the day, when we say that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, very clearly that is what we mean. I continue to speak, and the ACDP continues to put forward the position that, and I spoke very recently on within the budget vote in the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, and one of the points that was made is that South Africa has a wealth of raw materials. We are rich in gold, platinum, silver, copper, rich in uranium, beryllium. So there are many, many minerals that the world out there actually needs. But the problem that we have is we continue to perpetuate a colonial style system where South Africa is a net exporter of raw materials, and then we import beneficiated products. So we export, for example, our iron ore to India, to China, to Japan, and then we buy back the beneficiated products. So in essence, we are creating jobs by exporting our raw materials. We are creating jobs in those particular countries. We are creating jobs in China, creating jobs in Japan and India and the other countries that we export our raw materials to, rather than applying the principle of beneficiation. And most industrialized and first world countries apply this particular principle. If you have a raw material in your country that is needed by outside countries, then your particular nation actually has a benefit. You have a financial benefit in a sense, and so you use that particular benefit to the advantage that is given to you, but to benefit the citizens of your country first. You do not export your raw materials and then buy back the finished product, thereby creating jobs outside of the country, but creating unemployment and further entrenching unemployment within the country. So the ACDP certainly does not support the Employment Equity Amendment Act, and we want to make it very clear that we will oppose it. And so it's out there for comment currently, and we want to encourage all South Africans to look at making their voices known, because we do not want to be a country that further entrenches racial divisions by having legislation that compounds problems rather than solving the racial divides that we have within South Africa. So I see is that Malan, who's saying yes, Elishiva Malan saying yes, Korea is a great example of moving forward. So thank you, Elishiva. Leonie Lowe says, our economy needs innovative ideas, which is not race-based, but a blessing from God. For without God, there is no life in the economy. And absolutely, this is, Joseph says yes to structural reform. Thank you, Joseph. Yes to structural reform with the will to implement this fairly according to the constitutional rights for all cultural groups. You know, one of the sad things is, and Cheryl, maybe the last comment here, Israel is a prime example of a colonized country that literally rose out of the desert to the top food production, technology, and innovation country that it is. So yes, Cheryl, thank you. There's another example of Israel that was able to rise and causing the desert to bloom, so to speak, in Israel. Cheryl Jacobs, the ACDP is God's government for God's people, for God's purpose, to God's glory. I want to just touch on another aspect that our communications director brought to my attention, and that is the PEARLS. I think it's the International Literacy and Reading Organization that has come out with an very concerning statistic. They've been doing surveys in South Africa, and I've made comment on these surveys in some of my speeches at Parliament. I've also written articles to the editor, letters to the editor, lamenting the fact that in South Africa, so this particular study that was conducted by PEARLS found that some 80% of our grade 4s, 80% of our grade 4s cannot read with understanding. In other words, they are functionally illiterate, having spent some 4 years at school. This is within our public sector, within the public schools. Having 80% of our grade 4s, after spending 4 years at school, are not able to read with meaning. And so it clearly is a huge challenge that needs to be addressed. We've just recently concluded a study tour, that's the Department of Trade and Industry, and that was to South Korea. And one of the successes of South Korea was the fact that they focused on education. They had almost 80%, 70 to 80% illiteracy, because South Korea was largely agrarian, mainly farmers. And so there was no time to send children to school because you needed to work to put food on the table. But what South Korea did was they were able to turn the economy around, and they were able to turn that economy around because of a fixed, deliberate focus on education. And South Korea today is one of the top economic hubs in the world, one of the countries that has the largest GDPs in the world because of a focus on education. But South Africa will not be able to turn our economy around when we have children that are not able to read with meaning, when we have an education system that is dysfunctional. And so if one looks at the policies of the ACDP, our education policy, which focuses on the 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic, and clearly we call for a Cambridge-like style system of education. When one looks at Zimbabwe, which has that particular system of education, Zimbabwe has a system of education despite per capita spending less on education than South Africa. South Africa spends more money on education than any other African country, with the poorest outcomes. And that is an indictment on our country. And so clearly, with the ACDP as the government of the day, this will change. And so I want to thank our communications director for alerting us to this alarming statistic that some 80% of our grade 4s are functionally illiterate, unable to read for meaning. Another reason why South Africa needs the ACDP. And yes, I see that we have, while we prepare to have our Member of Parliament, other Member of Parliament, Honorable Sukers, coming in, I see that she's just beamed in shortly. But Mbali Ndlela says, my people perish because of a lack of knowledge. We stand for our rights as the youth of Christ, and we stand for a godly party in government. The leading party is failing us, and we hope that we vote right for the next elections. And so thank you, Mbali Ndlela, for your comments. And Leonie, maybe the final comment before we move on to Honorable Sukers. The problem with education is creating a long-term problem. We need a greater effort to help overcome a lockdown era education. So true. And so, Honorable Sukers, we want to hand over. Good evening and welcome again. We're looking for the update on the BELA Bill, and we know that you've been busy in different parts of the country. I think you've just come back from KwaZulu-Natal. So if you could give us the update on the BELA Bill and where things stand currently.
Thank you very much, DP, and thank you to all our supporters, members, and the general public that is joining us today. The report on the BELA Bill, I have to say that the fight is intensifying. And it is intensifying because the public is responding to the call of the ACDP for us to come against state overreach and fight for freedom of religion or belief in terms of the education of our children. And what has happened in KZN, I know that we have put the fear of God into the African National Congress with the response of the public, our homeschooling community specifically, to the call for us to oppose the clauses 41, 37, and 27, I will go very briefly over the clauses and why we are opposing. Clause 41 gives the minister broad powers to issue regulations. We know that those regulations will be in line with the policy positions of the department, and the policy on the prevention and management of teenage pregnancy specifically. The aim of that is to make available sexual reproductive services to learners, and to give them access to contraceptive technologies, and to give them access to abortions where necessary. That is the aim of the policy. And so we know that those regulations will be in line with those policies, and those regulations are enforceable by law. And we are opposing clause 41 because it is state overreach, and it marginalizes and usurps the authority and rights of parents in terms of their children. Because with that policy, a child as young as 12 would be able to access abortion and contraceptive services without their parents even knowing about it. We also know that if the minister has these powers, she can issue regulations in line with a policy position such as the transgender ideology guidelines that the department has drafted. And we as South Africans cannot allow that our right to freedom of religion or belief to become marginalized in spaces that should be ideologically free in accordance to the legislation that was passed. Clause 37 has direct impact on our homeschooling parents and our homeschooling community, in that they then are forced to register or make applications to the department, and they will have to align their curriculums with the CAPS curriculum, which forces them to then utilize or to teach their children in line with comprehensive sexuality education. And then with clause 27, the ACDP opposes this clause because it closes non-viable schools, is a rural education guideline that the department is implementing en masse nationally. And there's more than 3,000 schools we know that the department has in their visor to close because they are called non-viable. Most of these schools are your mission schools, your historical mission schools. What it does to the communities is it takes children out of their communities and it takes them to townships or to big schools. They merge these schools, and these kids are taken from a familiar environment, far away from home. And the resultant impact on that community is greater unemployment because cleaners and teachers are without work, and those learners become estranged from their parents because they many times the department fail to implement an effective transport plan. So these issues changes the shape of our communities. It changes and it impacts the role of parents in the lives of their children, and it makes the state become the primary parent, in effect, with an education system, as you've indicated, that is failing. Now, the momentum of our campaign is gaining steam, and we are going into fifth gear as we go into the Western Cape and then the Northern Cape. Fifth gear, DP, because now we are aiming to, in those meetings that are coming up, to ensure that more churches, more SGBs, more schools, school principals of our schools that are under target for closure will come out in their numbers to these meetings. I must also just conclude by saying the fear of God we've put into the ANC, so much so that on Sunday night they mobilized SATU to come out and support the ANC's legislation in terms of the BELA Bill. They came out as teachers, and I would say they did a disservice to a very noble profession, in that they have not studied completely the bill and its implication, especially on our rural communities and on parents. And so SATU just supported, and I want to really challenge their support of this bill, because how can you support a bill that would give access to 12-year-olds to an abortion service in the current climate where we know that in our schools, children are targeted by sexual predators, and these crimes can be hidden if a teacher or a school can just refer a child for an abortion and parents are out of the equation. So that's a high level, I think, overview. And just to say that we really, the campaign from our homeschooling community, our churches are coming on board, and we are seeing that we are filling those numbers. We need to make sure that we go into fifth gear and not give ground for the ANC to use their partners to fill those holes, and just blindly support legislation that will further plunge our education and our children, in fact, into greater social crises. Thank you, DP.
Thank you so much for that feedback. That was our Member of Parliament, the Honourable Maurice Soekers. And before you go, one of the things that I saw, and I agree with you that, you know, we need to go now into fifth gear, and let's keep the sixth gear in reserve, and should we need to go into sixth, then we'll up it a notch. But one of the things that I saw was, it appears as if in one of the meeting venues, that the venue seemed to have been changed kind of last minute. And I know that with some of the organizations, particularly at election time, where important information needs to be given to political parties, one of the things that they would do is last minute change the venue. And so you'd have people pitching up at one particular venue having not gotten the notice that the venue was changed. So did this actually happen at any of your meetings? And was this mentioned? If it did happen, was it raised to the necessary chair or individuals that were giving oversight?
Yeah. Just if we go historically in the campaign, the ACDP in the beginning, when we had the problems in Mpumalanga, where there were two venues on the same day that was advertised, we raised immediately the concern around improving the efficiency of organization and management of communication and planning of the public hearings. And so that happened, and we in fact we had two petitions, DP. The one petition was to postpone the hearings until after Easter because of the many challenges that was to do with the public hearings. They conceded to that, and it was supported in the committee. We had 10,000 signatories on that petition. The second petition was to improve the public participation process in light of the challenges that people have to get to rural venues, in light of the fact that there is a huge interest in the BELA Bill, and we need to cover both urban and rural areas. And so we wanted virtual hearings to be included in the itinerary of the committee. The ANC totally opposed that, and in fact was aggressively standing against the ACDP's proposal, not even allowing the proposal to be properly presented to the committee. And so the hearings continued. And now in the last hearing in KZN, what we have seen, again, what we are seeing is rural areas. You have urban areas where people cannot come, like Jozini, where we had a very few of urban parents being able to attend because of the fact that it was rural in Jozini, but we had some homeschoolers coming out. Then on Saturday and Saturday, in fact, we had a double booking where the ANC NEC had a meeting in the City Hall, and in the morning, Saturday morning, as we were en route to the venue change was then confirmed that we need to move to Granger Hall in the afternoon, which by the grace of God, I have to say, worked in our favor. I know there was a lot of homeschooling parents that actually fasted and prayed during the week that God's grace would cover the hearings, and it worked to the good for us, because that hall was packed with our homeschooling community parents. And yes, so yes, we had these challenges that you've just mentioned, DP.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you to again to our Member of Parliament, the Honourable Marie Soekers, all of our ACDP Members of Parliament. I want to assure you, under the leadership of our President, Reverend Dr. Kenneth Meshwe, who sets the platform, sets the tone for us, sets the example for us in terms of work ethic, but all of your ACDP Members of Parliament work hard and continue to give of their best. And the reason also why we do that is because we understand the principle of servant leadership. And we are here as servants. We are here as servants of the kingdom and servants to the people of South Africa. And so maybe just to read some comments in terms of the BELA Bill. This is Mina Kirsten saying, awesome work, MP Marie Soekers, and well done to our President, DP, and MPs for the excellent work that you are doing. We love you all. Well, thank you for those words of affirmation and love. We appreciate and we love our ACDP party and members who are there. From Limpopo, excellent points. Thank you for highlighting important impact areas. We fought for homeschooling and Christian education, and we cannot give up any ground. Well, I can assure you that as the ACDP, we continue to fight. We will not give up. We will not give up ground. We will continue to fight, particularly for our biblical values, hard earned over the years by the ACDP. Those particular areas, our value system, and we understand that there's a clash of ideology. It's either a secular humanistic worldview versus a biblical worldview. And within the ACDP, we are unashamed, we are unapologetic, we will not give up, we will not turn back on our particular worldview, which is a biblical worldview, understanding also that we have a Christian Judeo background. And so these value systems are what guides us. Our ACDP policies are policies that are biblically guided, founded, and determined by what the Word of God actually guides us to, and we will not move from that particular value system. Now, I know that next week there's going to be an interesting live streaming show that's going to take place with our president. And so we want to encourage you to invite come together around the laptop, around the television, whatever, around the cell phone, whatever device you are using. Get family, friends to come around and come and listening to what the ACDP is doing, the plans that the ACDP has to turn South Africa around. We need you and we need your involvement. So I don't know if there are any final comments that we have before we close up. Maybe just read with some final comments. There's Elishiva Milan saying, forward ACDP, forward. There is no other way that we can go but forward. Stand strong on the principles of God. ACDP, Marlene Oliver, God's not dead. Indeed, our God is alive. Corinne de Klerk, I thank God for anointed voices. Thank you, Corinne, also for your positive comment. Slow Lorraine Benny, may the Lord continue to give you vision and power of the Holy Spirit, and may He strengthen you. So thank you to each and every one of you. Beverly Peterson, thank you to our ACDP leadership. Well, we want to just say how we appreciate you, our ACDP family. We want to ask that you continue to give your support to the ACDP. Remember that next year we have what our President Dr. Meshwe says is a pivotal year and a key year in terms of elections. Perhaps one of the elections which will determine the future of South Africa, whether South Africa will, this point of inflection will be a turnaround for the country. And clearly we want to see a godly government in place post 2024. So remember, South Africa needs the ACDP,
Yes.
and the ACDP needs you. The Lord bless you. The Lord keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance to you and give you peace. God bless, and we'll see you next week.